Please rewind this cassette.
So now that we've talked about Ashby, Altman, and Scorsese, it's time to get into the work of one of my 5 favorite directors. Coming into the scene strong with his masterful debut, 12 Angry Men, Sidney Lumet was one of the most prolific and reliable directors of the 70s. He made 11 movies in 8 years, and while not all of them are classics or even great, the ones that stand out have remained defining films of that decade. His work is held up by his gift with actors, a non-flashy approach to his craft, and an uncanny ability to capture both the sociological and psychological struggles we face in our daily lives. Sort of an invisible director, there's no visual trademark of Lumet that you can pinpoint in the same way you could with someone like Kubrick or Brian De Palma. One could argue this is due to a lack of style, and I've heard this before, but I would counter that it's not that Lumet's films lack visual beauty, it's that he was so good at his job as a filmmaker, he didn't linger on the things that other directors choose to indulge in. Above all else, this man cared about storytelling. He only showed and focused on what was needed to better convey the text of the material. So sure, people don't always go to his films for the cinematography, but in my personal experience, I think far too many cinephiles focus on those elements when talking about movies, saying things like, film is a visual medium, or only talking about movies that are known for being pretty. That's all they care about. Isn't this shot great? Isn't this moment beautiful? Oh my god, the lighting here. Wow, they did this at the magic hour. I mean, that's great and all, but look at Terrence Malick. He's made some of the most beautiful movies of all time, and most of them suck. And the thing I don't like about this is that it ignores the other parts of directing, which includes blocking, the cutting of scenes, creating a tone and pace for your story. And in all those respects, Sidney Lumet was a master, with his best films containing an irony and social realism that comes through the screen, into your mind and your heart, forever changing how you experience life. Now during the 70s he made 3 very iconic features, Serpico, Dog Day Afternoon, and Network. Serpico is a film that really solidified the classic police procedural. There's not a cop show from the last 40 years that didn't take influence from this movie. Following Frank Serpico, played by a young Al Pacino in one of his most fiery performances, the movie tells a story spanning years as we follow the process of an undercover cop facing corruption from his fellow officers. While the film is dated some, I always thought you could cut a good 20-25 minutes out of it, and the relationship subplots just kind of fall flat, as I never thought that Al Pacino was a very strong romantic lead in any of his movies.
You didn't like the whole idea of my being a cop, so don't give me that shit. You never did.
I love you, Paco!
Serpico is still a total blast, with so many perfect and engrossing sequences. I love the energy of this movie, and Pacino elevates it to another level. For fans of Pacino going big, you get a lot of the yelling and all that stuff, which he would become more famous for in the 90s.
Why'd I get mixed up with that bitch?
Because she got a great ass! And you got your head all the way up it!
This is one of those showy performances that only a young actor could really give. It plays in total contrast to his more subdued work in the Godfather films. Candid and gritty in its approach, Lumet keeps things close to the ground. On the opposite end, Serpico feels like a mythical character, his grandeur overshadowing the mechanics of the story being told around him. Not just a character study, Lumet's film takes a broader scope and criticizes the systemic failure of those in power. It's a tour de force, one of the bravest and most harrowing examples of the super cop genre.
Al Pacino. I look like Al Pacino. Yeah, cool. Al Pacino. Yeah. Al Pacino.
Can't wear a wire. They're filling me up every day.
Oh, come on, Frank. You'll have complete protection.
Yeah, I've heard that one before. I gotta put a dime in the meter.
Sit down, Frank.
Joe, go put a dime in the meter for Officer Serpico.
Don't fuck with my plan!
Hey, break it up! What is this?
That right there is a tale of corruption and intrigue, the likes of which are gonna rock this city.
Spin Doctor's mix?
No, I taped over the Spin Doctors mix.
Now we come to Dog Day Afternoon, easily one of my all-time favorite films. Somehow Pacino is able to top his work in Serpico and gives arguably the best performance of his career, or at least with Godfather Part 2, as homosexual bank robber Sonny Wartzik. Now, how's this for a premise? 3 guys go to rob a bank. Within a minute of starting their crime, one of them changes his mind and leaves the 2 of them alone. Then just a few minutes later, what seems to be the entire New York City police force shows up. So the remaining 2 criminals take the bank employees hostage, making demands for their escape. Not only is all of this going on, but we then find out Sonny, our main character, is doing all of this to pay for his lover's sex change operation. What a plot! And it's as exciting and as compelling as it sounds. After the opening montage, the movie jumps out at you like a bomb going off, with an immediate energy in its capturing of the minutiae of this day. Things keep stacking on top of each other, with new elements being introduced every 10 minutes. With the stunning and uncommon mix of comedy, drama, and pathos, it's a very unique tone that this movie has. If there's a real strength to Dog Day, it's turning the minor characters of the hostages into fleshed out, quirky, real people, each dealing with the stress of this day in a different way, and in that they are almost sharing some of the burden with their captors. This creates a deep empathy for everyone involved, and nobody ever feels like a villain in this movie. You don't want anything bad to happen to anybody. Lumet once again demonstrating his ability with confined spaces. The scenes in the bank are every bit as compelling as the arguments in 12 Angry Men. The scenes outside conveying a kinetic energy like that of the French Connection. There's just so much going on. Not a second is wasted as we see Sonny navigate all the things that come his way. Phone conversations end up having the dramatic weight of a boxing match.
With the language and everything.
When I'm trying to talk to you, and you...
A person can't communicate with you.
Everything here is so dense in its humanity. Sure, a lot of the pieces are conventional, but it's the way Sonny is as a person that makes it unique within the genre. His reasons for committing the crime aren't selfish, and throughout the day he takes it upon himself to care for the hostages.
He wants one. Him, right?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Okay? He goes.
He can't help but put the struggles of others on his shoulders. This is a likable trait, but also Sonny's greatest flaw. If he let go of his need to please everyone in his life, he probably would have never gotten in this situation to begin with. What seems like a traditional heist movie soon turns into a portrait of a city folding in on itself. Everyone crowds to the crime scene, and Sonny becomes a bit of a hero as he protests the police outside of the bank. The people cheer this man because he's them. He's all of us, who got pushed too far and found ourselves in one really bad day. All of this makes for a story that captures the way in which the people and the media can fall into groupthink whenever the illusion of a normal society starts to show its cracks. Having said all that, the movie still belongs to Pacino, one of the great American actors. What makes this performance so special is that Pacino and Lumet aren't trying to explain Sonny to us. They're just showing him for what he is, a pathetic and misguided man who's just trying to hold it together for a little while longer. Movies don't get much better than this. I'd also like to take a little side note here and talk about editing for a minute. Most 70s movies don't typically use a lot of quick cuts. You'll see it in certain films by certain directors, and certainly this was a trait in movies in the late 60s and early 70s, but there's a sequence here when the police are trying to come in the back, and Sonny figures this out and shoots out of a window that's at the top of the door in the back. And just the way that these next few shots are cut is so quick that, I mean, it's insane. It's like something you would see in a modern movie. Lumet liked this kind of cut every once in a while. He would do this thing where I don't even think some of these shots last a second. And it's just little things like that that I think really give this movie a lot of flavor, where it changes itself up dynamically and visually every so often, which are things that may not immediately be something someone thinks about, like a shot that's beautiful and is lingered on for a long time, but are just nice little technical exercises that Lumet had fun with, and are trademarks of his work that you can pick up on if you watch his movies more than once.
Attica! Attica! Attica!
Attica! I'll see you guys in hell.
Attica!
Did he say Gattaca?
Come and get me!
Lumet's third classic of the 70s is one of the all-time most memorable satires, written by the brilliant Paddy Chayefsky. Network is a movie that's only become more relevant with every decade, predicting the coming of reality television, social media, a lack of trust in corporations and government, powered by a rebellious and self-aware look at the world media. This is a film very much about people's lack of humanity, how it's all about numbers, and the way in which you sell our souls for power and influence. Now mostly remembered for its famous mad as hell speech performed by the late Peter Finch, Network has too many great performances to count, everyone at the top of their respective game, each actor trying to show one another up in highly combative and poetic exchanges of dialogue.
Know where he is.
That crazy son of a bitch Beale has caught on, so don't tell me you don't know where he is.
He could be jumping off a roof for all I know. The man is insane. He's not responsible for himself. He needs care and treatment. And all you grave robbers think about is that he's a hit.
You know, Max, it's just possible that he isn't insane. That he is, in fact, imbued with some special spirit.
My God, I'm supposed to be the romantic. You're supposed to be the hard-bitten realist.
All right.
It's all pretty cold and cynical stuff, and the movie is almost saying that everyone is corrupt, and those who aren't just haven't been bought out yet. It can mess your head up if you give into it too much. Robert Duvall and Faye Dunaway are especially unlikable pieces of shit in this movie. William Holden's character of Max being the only one who cares about what happens to Howard, or seems to care about any kind of integrity. He thought his job had it, but apparently nobody really cares about what it means to be a newsman anymore. He gives one of the greatest monologues about mortality that I've ever heard, saying he's scared shitless because all of a sudden it's closer to the end than it is to the beginning, and death is suddenly a perceptible thing to him, with definable features. It's horrifying. The script is filled with this kind of mind-blowing stuff. It's almost unbelievable that all of this came out of one man's head. Not only is this some of the greatest screenwriting of the 20th century, it's just some of the best writing, period. Everything going on is so borderline absurd that one wonders if the movie was supposed to be a straight comedy, but it's all too easy to take the satire seriously. In many ways, this film scares me, not just for its depiction of corporations and the cutthroat nature of business, but just for how hollow Lumet's direction is. I mean that as a compliment. This is where his supposed lack of style only benefits the material. Network doesn't need a director who would try and overwhelm it with his own personal touches. It needs someone who puts the words and ideas front and center. It's so powerful because it's so cold, because it's so distant. You can't touch this movie. Now, this stuff isn't subtle, and I think it's fair to say that Chayefsky wasn't exactly right when it came to the future of television. If anything, TV ended up being much more policed and tame than anything in this movie. I would say one of the downfalls of television is that it didn't take more risk and put more shocking stuff on the air. However, the larger scope message of the movie more than applies to the modern day internet. Anyone and everyone doing whatever they can to get a little bit of attention, to be in the spotlight, acting like they're counterculture, but really wanting to join the higher class. These are self-obsessed people determined to morph into false idols. Remember celebrities? Now we have e-celebrities. Remember big evil corporate America that controlled everything? Now we have Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, and they literally control what you see and what you can say. This stuff is mystical, and what's being hinted at in Network is almost hard to fully comprehend. As sardonic as it is a probing look at those who value work over the well-being of others, if Chayefsky and Lumet were right about one thing, it's that the form shapes the content, and it's ultimately the form that shapes how we consume it. Lumet, of course, made some other notable films during this time. The Anderson Tapes is a fun and well-crafted neo-noir starring the late Sean Connery, may he rest in peace, featuring a score by Quincy Jones. Speaking of Quincy Jones, Lumet also made The Wiz, the film in which Jones and Michael Jackson first discussed working together as Jones was impressed with Michael's singing as the Scarecrow. So that's right, without Sidney Lumet, there's no Thriller. The black sheep of his 70s run is an adaptation of the Peter Shaffer play Equus. Shaffer would later go on to write Amadeus, which would be adapted into a much more successful film directed by Milos Forman. Equus is one of my favorite plays of all time, but it doesn't really open itself up to a cinematic interpretation. Kudos to Lumet for trying it, I mean seriously, but this is a case where I think a more visual director would have benefited the story. Things that are implied on stage with the use of people in costume have less power when we see them with real animals and special effects. Richard Burton gives a commanding and memorable performance, but this is an odd movie to be sure. Don't get me wrong, I dig it and all, but I can see why it wasn't a big hit and why critics didn't love it too much. Something about the abstract nature of the play is lost in this movie, and the film itself is much more ugly and an uncomfortable experience overall. It's still worth watching for the screenplay written by Shaffer. So what's left to say? Well, I think we should end this with a quote from Sidney Lumet's book, Making Movies, which is a must-read for any aspiring filmmaker. I have a copy in my room right now. Lumet writes, "I don't know how to choose work that illuminates what my life is about. I don't know what my life is about and don't examine it. My life will define itself as I live it. The movies will define themselves as I make them. As long as the theme is something I care about at the moment, it's enough for me to start work. Maybe work itself is what my life is about." The workman-like director. The invisible director. Sidney Lumet, I see you. Oh shit, I forgot about Murder on the Orient Express.
Check your reality.